start now. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to webinar number 2 of our series of 5 webinars. This webinar is covering risk management and how private security companies can utilize, and we're going to show you some key concepts around risk management. So although this is primarily for private security companies, the themes are applicable to any sector of business. There will be a couple of polls throughout, so please do get involved in the polls. They are anonymous, and we are running a live Q&A. So any questions that you may have throughout the presentation, please feel free to type those into the chat function. This will be recorded, and we will add this to our MSS Global YouTube channel. And without further ado, I will hand over to Jonah, who will take you through this presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Dan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonah, MSS Africa Director. This is the second of a series of 5 webinars we plan to do on implementing security operations management system. And today we'll be talking about risk management. In step 1, we talked about leadership and strategy. Here we're talking about risk management. All right, before I go into the core for today, just to tell you about a bit of the company. MSS Global was established in 2011. Our focus is on ethical assurance and certification of companies. We're a recognized member of ICOCA, and we offer affordable and pre-audit education support for our clients. All right, having said that, just a bit about my experience. I have over 9 years experience cutting across various sectors, and I have a bias for learning and development outside every other areas of strength, which I possess, as you can see. All right, now, all organizations will face risk at some point in time, right? Now, Theodore Roosevelt said, risk is like fire. If controlled, it can help you. If uncontrolled, it will rise up and destroy you. All organizations will face risk that will affect them in various ways. The key thing is to be aware of the risk and manage them to an acceptable level where possible. Life, they say, is a risk, which is a common saying, right? And if life is a risk and organizations do face risk, then what is expected is that you prepare yourself and you are able to manage such risk to take advantage of opportunities. Now, Neville said, risk is good. Not properly managing your risk is a dangerous leap. Having said that, which has formed a basis for our conversation for today, I'd like to go into the definition of risk management. And in defining risk management, looking at ISO 31000, it defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. The effect of uncertainty on objectives. Now, I'd like to use an analogy in describing this. Take, for instance, we have to move from point A to point B, which is our objective. Now, we decide to use a saloon car to convey personnel from point A to point B. However, the option we have in taking these routes is a lonely, bumpy, hilly road, right? Now, if we look at the objective, which is moving from point A to point B, definitely there are certain uncertainties when you look at what you want to achieve. Now, the aim of risk management is to minimize, the probability and impact of negative events, the probability and impact of negative events. Now, what are those risks we could most likely face when we engage or embark on this journey? One is there's a probability that you could have a flat tire. There's a probability of an attack. There's a probability of you having the vehicle damaged while embarking on that journey, knowing fully well that it's a bumpy, hilly, and a lonely road, since the life of the occupants will be at risk. All right. Now, what other option, or sorry, why else? What else do we prompts you to maintain or to go into what other aim do we need to consider here? Secondly, is monitor and control the risk where possible. Monitor and control the risk where possible. Now, looking at the scenario, the analogy just described. Now, how do you monitor? How do you control the risk, right? What is the likelihood of occurrence? What is the impact, right, on your objective if you engage? And thirdly, realize opportunities. How do I, at the end of the day, achieve my objective despite the risk that have been identified? Now, that is what risk management is all about. Now, having said that, right, let's quickly look at why is risk management important. Now, we're talking about private security companies here, and security operations obviously comes with a lot of risk. Hence, a security organization not engaging in properly managing its risks, it's setting itself up for failure. Yes, because you clearly understand with your operational activities for some companies, depending on your scope of work, could definitely be activities that involves high risk. So it is expected that you manage the risk. Reason being that you're dealing with properties, you're dealing with human lives, as the case may be, depending on your scope. So one major reason is you operate in areas of uncertainty and risk. So risk management is important. Risk management is important. Secondly, the reason why we're having this is to enlighten our participants on the standard 18788. So another reason why risk management is important is because it is a requirement. It's a requirement for 18788. Another reason, again, is why risk management is important is because it provides an understanding of the risk to internal and external stakeholders, right? Your stakeholders, employees, directors, investors, who your stakeholders are, need to have an understanding of the risk the organization is facing. Okay, all right. They need to have an understanding of the risk the organization is facing. We've said that it's a requirement for ISO 18788. Now, having said all that, let's look at risk capacity, appetite, and thresholds. Now, we'll start with risk appetite. It's the immediate or short-term willingness of an organization to take risk attitude, and risk capacity. Now, to talk about this, I would like to use this analogy. I am hungry. I feel like eating. I want to eat. I have appetite for food. That doesn't make me a glutton. I think that's a clear description of what risk appetite and risk attitude is all about. It's two extremes of a single stick or pole. Now, yes, I am hungry. I want to eat. That doesn't make me a glutton. As a glutton, you just want to keep on eating and taking risk despite the fact that you are not hungry. Now, so we say risk appetite is the immediate or short-term willingness of an organization to take risk. While in a longer-term view, we can be looking at risk attitude, a longer-term view of risk within an organization. Now, when we talk about risk capacity, we're looking at the organization having the capability to actually take risk. Do you have the resources? Do you have the resources to take risk, to embark on such risk? Do you have the resources? So those are just terminologies which definitely needs to be communicated, right, within an organization, keeping everyone on the same page. In addition, we also look at risk criteria. And for risk criteria, it's the terms of reference against which the significance of a risk is evaluated. In this essence, in this context, we are referring to the standard. Now, let me give a critical example. Now, if you are trying to manage financial risk in an organization, most likely you will have different cadres and what each cadre is entitled to spend. So you can say for supervisors, they can spend $500. For managers, what they're entitled to spend is $1,000. And for maybe senior managers, what they're entitled to spend is, say, $10,000. Now, for any that serves as a benchmark. It serves as a criteria for expenditure, right? At different categories or levels or cadres, right? Now, if for any reason any of these persons or personnel want to go above the limit that has been set for them, then they need to seek approval. That's a way of placing controls in an organization. Now, having said that, let's look at what does an organization need in place to manage risk. So now, what do you need to put in place? We've been able to explain or to you agree with me that risk management is all organizations face risk. We need to manage such risk. And now that you understand that, the question now is, what does an organization need in place to manage risk? What do I need to put in place? Now, from here, we like to say that the first thing you need to put in place is a risk management policy. A risk management policy. You need a risk management policy, right, in setting up for you to be able to manage risk. Now, why do I need a risk management policy? One, it communicates the intent of top management, right, towards this, the overall intent of senior management. Now, apart from having the policy out by top management, it is also expected that it is signed. Now, signing it by senior management or by top management shows commitment, that top management is committed to adhering to this policy, right? That gives it the impetus and the authority for it to be cascaded through the organization. Now, apart from having a risk management policy in place, what next thing you need is a risk management framework. A risk management framework. And a risk management framework is the structured process used to identify threats in an organization, used to define strategy for eliminating or minimizing the impact of the risk. So how do you want to identify threats? What process do you want to put in place to identify threats? How will you eliminate or minimize the risk identified? What strategy? How will you monitor? What mechanisms do you want to put in place, right? And when you have determined all this, it will be documented or recorded. Now, that process of identifying threats, determining how it will be assessed, analyzed, eliminated, or minimized, right? Those mechanisms you will want to put in place, that is what we term your risk framework. Great. Now, it includes the roles and responsibilities, reporting requirements, and procedures, tools that are necessary, documentation, and record keeping. Now, all that forms your risk management framework. All right, before we go further into this conversation, I'll quickly like us to take a poll. And a question is going to pop up on your screen now, right? The question is, does your company have a defined risk criteria? All right, so if you're listening to me out there, I would just quickly like you to take this poll. Does your company have a defined risk criteria? Does your company have a defined risk criteria? Okay, we have about, okay, great. Now, I would like to state that having a defined risk criteria is a requirement of the standard. Having a defined risk criteria is a requirement of the standard. So it's something that is paramount, that you need to have a benchmark, right? You need to have a benchmark. All right, let's continue with our conversation. Now we'll quickly look at the risk assessment process. We'll look at the risk assessment process. And the risk assessment process, top on the list there is risk identification. Risk identification. Now let's go back to the analogy I used earlier, where I talked about you having to move occupants from point A to point B on a bumpy, hilly, lonely road, right, with a saloon car. All right. So the question you might want to ask yourself is, this is your objective staring at you in the face. What are the risks? What risk can I identify in this task? Okay. So in risk identification, all you need to do is to find, recognize, and describe the risk that help or prevent you meeting your objectives. And like I said earlier, on a bumpy, hilly road that is lonely, right? There's a possibility of you having a flat tire. There's a possibility of the car being damaged or encountering problems. There's a possibility of attack or kidnap or anything, right? Great. So you've been able to identify these risks. Now, there's also the possibility of the vehicle being damaged, right? Now, once you've identified this risk, the next thing you need to do is analyze and evaluate. You analyze and evaluate. Now, at this point in time, you're asking yourself, what is the likelihood of us having a flat tire? What's the likelihood of an attack? If we should have a flat tire, what's going to be the impact on their objective? So you're looking at likelihood and impact at this point. There are some areas you see probability and the consequence of the action, of the risk on your objective. Right. So that is where analysis and evaluation comes into play. You need to analyze, you need to evaluate. Now, ensure that when you are doing this, that there's a structured process in which both the likelihood and impact are considered for each risk. This will improve consistency over time. Remember to always keep your process simple, right? It has to be also a structured process. Now, if you have determined how your analysis and evaluation will be, keep that mechanism, keep that process, and ensure you repeat it over time, bearing in mind that your processes need to be simple. Now, having said that, after you do your evaluation, we can now begin to think, how do we treat? On a hilly, bumpy road, if I should have a flat tire, I need to come with a spare tire. Are the tools for changing tires available? If I don't have, I need to put them in the car. Is there a safe haven? Should there be a breakdown, or should there be any mishap on the road? Is there a safe haven where we can easily get to? Do we have backup? Can we call for backup? Now you begin to think of what you need to do. Now, this is sometimes known as the risk response. Should it occur, what would you do? Now, the purpose of treating or responding to risk is to turn the uncertainty faced by a risk to the organization's benefit by constraining threats and taking advantage of opportunities. Now, should it happen, how do we convert that into benefits for the organization? Now, there are various ways you can respond to this. Now, in certain instances, you might just have to tolerate it. Take, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic that hit the world. Now, organizations were not fully prepared, but we just had to bear it. We just had to bear it, right? Organizations were not prepared. Some had to rejig their strategy to fit into it. A lot of companies were closed, a lot of losses. Some were able to weather the storm, some were not. You just tolerate it, right? Now, you could also treat the risk. And in treating, we mean, it is the most common risk response. Like in terms of health and safety, you could use your personal protective equipment in treating risk. Now, you could also transfer the risk. When you feel you don't have the capacity to handle it, you can transfer it by subcontracting. You can also transfer it by getting insurance. You can also terminate. Stop the activity that creates the risk. You can also terminate. Oh, we cannot go further. It's going to hinder our objectives. I don't think we should take this. Then you step back. And lastly, you can take the opportunity. Now, if you see that your inputs, you have the capacity to be able to take on, knowing fully well that the benefits is worth it, then you can take the opportunity. Now, these are various responses to risk. Now, having said this, this takes us to reviewing and reporting on risk. Reviewing and reporting on risk. Now, reviewing and reporting can help us to understand the following. Why do we review? Why do we have to report? You need to look at what you have done. go back to look at what you have done and see how effective it is. Have new risk arisen? Now you developed your risk at the beginning of the year. Now this is the end of the year, and you're trying to see the challenges you've gone through all through that year. Has the environment changed? Has the external environment changed? What has changed? Do we have new risk? Do we have new risk that the organization is facing? These are objectives. Do we have new risk that we need to contend with? Are there changes in the risk phase? Are there new risk? Are our risk management process effective? Now, these are questions you now need to ask yourself when you want to review and report. Now, definitely this will spark up conversations within your organizations, because to definitely spark up a conversation within the organization. Now, once you've been able to come up with this, the next is you communicate. Communication is key. Risk needs to be communicated, as well as measures to mitigate them. If anything changes or there are new findings, this has to be communicated. It has to be communicated. Communication is key when it comes to risk management. You do your review, you do your report, then you cascade. You ensure that if there's any mishap and new measures are put in place to mitigate a repeat or a reoccurrence, then that has to be communicated to all. Communication is very, very vital. Communication is vital. Now, who needs to know? Everybody needs to know. All stakeholders need to know. Internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. Communicate the lessons learned to them. Everybody needs to know. Now, risk communication starts with the identification of the stakeholders. Who is the risk owner? Who are the interested parties in this scenario that have interest in that particular risk? And once the stakeholders have been identified, the nature of the risk information that needs to be communicated must be decided. The stakeholders can be individuals within the business, they could be clients or subcontracted entities. Now, it has to be communicated what they need to know, all that they need to know. Now, supporting the process. In supporting the process, what do we need to support effective risk management? What do we need to support effective risk management? And by that, we mean tools that can be used in supporting effective risk management. Top on our list is a SWOT analysis. Now, the SWOT analysis helps to determine strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Okay, this is a simple and a straightforward risk analysis tool. You also want to do an external, you also want to do a personal analysis. Now, the personal analysis is actually, it's great in identifying external risk to your organization. Yes, it helps in identifying external risk to your organization. Now, we can also have a risk register. When we talk about this a little bit much more, we could also have a risk register. Then one thing is key. One thing is key. Do not drown in paperwork and have an over bureaucratic system that is complicated and difficult to manage across various projects or entities. Now, when we, like we said in step one, implementing your security operations management system is not about you having piles of papers on the shelf or a lot of documents all there. Yes, it is essential, but it is beyond all that. So do not drown yourself in paperwork. Now, quickly, let's just look at this. What is a risk register? Okay, it's actually the purpose of the risk register is to facilitate ownership and management of each risk. So you have a compendium where the risks have been enumerated that are peculiar to your organization, right? The risk owner identified, the likelihood and the impact of such risk has also been identified. And an analysis of the risk has been done. Feedbacks and outcomes are documented there. right? And which can also be improved on. Your risk register should be a living document. It should not be something you do at the beginning, at the start of maybe when you're starting starting the company and you do not go back to it. It means it needs to be reviewed. It has to be a living document. Now, it helps in the management of individual risks that have been identified, and it also provides awareness, all right, for risks that have been identified. And that it also helps in risk communication. Okay, so if you're on this, if you're listening to me and your organization maintains a risk register, you need to understand that the risk register has to be a living document. It has to be a living document. All right, now I'll just quickly show you the format of a risk register. This is a proposed format. You could see that there's a risk description, there's a likelihood, impact of risk, overall rating, the controls in place, and the risk owner. All right, this is just a sample. All right, now this takes us into another poll question. We'd just like to ask another question. So the question is popping up on your screen, and it is, does your organization have a risk register that is actively used across the business? Does your organization have a risk register that is actively used across the business? Okay, it's either yes, no, or you're not sure. Does your organization have a risk register that is actively used across the business? Okay, all right, we have 100% yes. Great, great. All right, now a risk register is key. A risk register is key. It is also a requirement of the standard. It's a requirement of the standard. All right, having said that, I would like to just do a recap. Now, one, understand the risk you face and manage as much as possible. Understand the risk you face and manage as much as possible. Have an established appetite for risk. Yes, each organization should have, and you should know how far you want to go when it comes to taking risk. Then have a framework in place that is set by top management to ensure buy-in. And remember, we said the framework is a structured process you've put in place in identifying, evaluating, analyzing, and controlling risk, responding to risk. Also, you need to have a repeatable process, a process that is simple. Keep it simple, a process that is simple, that you can repeat, all right, that will also have an endorsement from senior management or top management, a framework that is endorsed, also with an understanding of the organization's appetite for risk, and also understand the risk that the organization faces. Now, this is just a summary of everything we have said under risk management. All right, that brings me to the end of step 2, risk management. I'll just hand over to Dan to take it up from there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. A cracking slideshow there. If you can just click onto the next slide, please, Jonah. A lot of, well, everything that we're covering in all of these 5 webinars are covered in our education suite. So the leadership and commitment, that was in the previous webinar, that is available on YouTube, as well as this risk management one. We've got a 33-page guide for implementing ISO 18778 across a private security company, but there's also about 40 education examples. So if that's something that you're interested in, there is a 20% off discount code at the bottom there. So please head to our website and purchase that, as it's a great education tool for companies that are looking to implement and be certified to ISO 18788. If you just click onto the next slide, Jonah. Our next webinar we'll be covering planning, support and actual delivery of security operations. So we're going to cover a number of different topics, such as the resource considerations for a PSC, competencies and training, and we're going to cover competencies and training of both your staff, but those who you may subcontract out work to, and also a recurring theme, which is key, is reporting and communication, as we've covered. Both internally but also to your stakeholders, understanding who we need to report and communicate to and why. We're running that at the end of March, on 31st of March, and that will be 10 o'clock UK time or 11 o'clock West Africa time. So keep an eye out for our social media, especially LinkedIn, where we will release the registration link for there. But thank you for everyone who's attended, and have a great day.